Okay, yeah, there just aren't any. Um, like I say, it comes back to the bucket. If we're only going to have the numbers 1 and 2 and 4 and 5 and 7 and 8 um, on the floor, you can't say, oh, um, the other numbers had to be there because this is a consecutive sequence, because you're assuming that there's a sequence and maybe there isn't. You're assuming what you're proving in effect. Whereas, like I say, those absences mean something, and actually, I'm getting ahead of myself, but that's one of the points that the Bible makes, is that everything produces after its own kind, and that's one of the profound differences between its claim and everything else on the planet, as far as commenting on that. So I don't know. That, to me, that's a major point. This gap thing. I mean, it certainly justifies. I'm just saying that that's a definite problem with evolution. It doesn't disprove evolution, but it's a definite problem. And I don't see that you've created any actual problems with positing that an intelligence could have arisen or could have always been that created us. I don't see why that isn't. We look at the complexity of things, and that's the most likely explanation for the world we're in. Even if somewheres evolution really is taking place, it's more likely that we're the case that intelligence cranked it out. That's what I'm saying, is that in school we should have both viewpoints, and say, they're not necessarily both equally well supported, but here are the basic two ways of looking at this. People have trouble dealing with how complexity arises and things. I guess somebody needs to make a computer program that evolves into something. It's probably been done. I don't know. To show sophisticated order coming out. I mean, you see things like fractals, which are truly amazing, where a small equation produces a very complex structure, such as the Mandelbrot set, and numerous other ones. I mean, they have figures that look like ferns and like landscapes and what have you. But again, you're back to the anthropic principle that that the most likely explanation is that some previous existing being did it. As far as explaining how the universe arose, rather than just saying that it arose by chance and we had to be that one, that the universes that work are most frequently going to be found to have been created by prior intelligence.
Well, the thing is, even if there was no theory of evolution whatsoever, and we had no idea how anything happened, by saying God did it, that's simply a God of the gaps argument. That's simply replacing I don't know with God did it.
No, I'm not, and certainly there are Christians that make that sort of argument, that, as far as they're concerned, it's all magic, it's all abracadabra, there it is. No, what I'm saying is that there's, just like an investigator can look at a crime scene and say, no, this was serial killer A, not serial killer B. It has his signature. I'm arguing that the signature of planning and intelligence is imprinted on the details of how our universe works, how life itself works, and how we, eventually we'll be talking about how, we as human beings work. Do we need a God to function right, type of thing. Questions like that.
The the thing about creationism, especially where you're arguing for a specific God of some kind, is you have to be able to show that it makes predictions that come true. Can't even if you poke holes in the fossil record, and I'm not convinced that there actually are holes in the fossil record. I think there are certainly holes in some parts of it, but the evolution of say mankind from the common ancestor we have with apes, that's very well documented. But even if there were,
How many skeletons do we have? I mean, how do we? Yeah.
I actually have that up on here.
But I'm saying, I know that I've seen the the picture that shows man coming out of the jungle and onto the plains and walking and all that and all the transitional forms. But my point is that most of those skeletons have been constructed from jaws or from very partial skeletons, and not very many partial skeletons at that. I mean, when you look at the actual bones, I mean, that stuff is pretty speculative. I mean, they're doing a fine job that of saying, okay, here's a jawbone, so it had to be attached like this, and something attached like this had to have this above it, and pretty soon they've got a whole skeleton. And I don't know, I think that takes a lot of faith too.
It's
And you look at the fossil record, I'm not poking holes. They're there. I mean, there's clean cut divisions between almost everything. And like I say, the duckbill platypus is probably the most blatant, possible, exception you might want to think about. But even there, we don't have the transitional forms that would lead up to it or from it.
There's a YouTube user named Aaron Raw, and he's got a entire video that just on the evolution of man from the common ancestor, and it shows every single one of the fossils, every single one of the transitions from the change in the skull cranium, the walking upright, all that kind of stuff. But I'm certainly no expert on paleontology, so I can't comment other than to say that I haven't really. The evidence is there if I want to go and look at it. It's definitely there in the natural history museums. It's there in whatever kind of stuff I choose to look up. Whereas the evidence for a creator is,
I don't know, like I say, every time I've tried to find
Go ahead.
All I know is that I've asked biologists, I've said, okay, where are the forms? Where are the intermediate forms? And you just don't see any detailed transitions from one species to another, and yet there's a whole bunch of fossils for a given species. There's lots of cat fossils, there's lots of dog fossils, but there's lots of the fossils of their supposed ancestor. But there's nothing in between these to suggest that there was a transition at all. I mean, if there were just a paucity of, if there just were not very many fossils at all, my point wouldn't mean anything. But the fact that there are a lot of fossils, of cats, a lot of fossils of dogs, and a lot of fossils of their